Did you ever stop to think that that ugly Google form that you just filled in has a carbon footprint? Might sound completely crazy, but the internet as a whole has a carbon footprint that amounts to 3.7% of all the emissions globally. To put that into perspective, that's almost as much as the entire aviation industry. Today, we'll talk about how web forms contribute to the internet's digital carbon footprint, and we'll rank form builders from the least to the most sustainable using research that we did ourselves. So if you're unfamiliar with digital sustainability, you might be wondering why I'm talking about web forms and carbon footprints. Essentially, every time you load in a form, there's a whole chain of computers and devices that are going to need electricity to give you that form. And of course, whoever says electricity also says carbon emissions. So you might be wondering to what extent all of that carbon emission actually matters in the grander scheme of things. And to put it into perspective, your average internet user generates about 229 kilograms of CO2 per year from the digital activity, right? So forms is included into that. And if you want to keep global warming to 1.5%, that's about 41% of your carbon sort of emissions that you can emit. So your carbon budget on an annual basis. So the internet usage as a whole has quite a bit of a footprint. And if you look at forms specifically, a tool like Typeform has generated about 670 tons of CO2 since they've initially started sort of allowing people to build forms. And that's only 10% of the entire market share. So web forms will have an impact on your carbon footprint. The question is, of course, which form builders perform best and how do you actually measure that? Okay, so to measure the carbon impact of various form builders, we first had a set of standardized 5 forms, right? So each of these forms uses different kinds of functionality offered by those form builders. So we have a simple contact form, we have a multi-page form, we have a multi-page form which has a whole bunch of different form elements added to it. We have a single page form which has a lot of multimedia elements to it, and then the final version, so of the 5, is one that has conditional logic. So depending on a specific answer, you'll go to a different page. So 5 different types of forms that are going to be built in 10 of the most well-known form builders. So essentially it's going to be Google Form, Tally, Typeform, Weebly, Fillout, Jotform, Paperform, Forms.app, Make Forms, and 123 Form Builder. So 10 form builders, 5 types of forms. We're going to build those forms in every 10 of them, and then we're going to run them through 3 different carbon calculators. So there's a whole bunch of them available online. We took the most popular ones again, which is the website Carbon Calculator, its Digital Beacon, and Web Page Test. So this allows us to have an average of those 3 tools for each of those types of forms built in every type of form builder. Okay, so before we give you an overview of, in general, which is the most sustainable form builder, it's interesting to look at the differences of form types. So essentially, are you able to build forms that are more sustainable simply by reducing the amount of functionality that you use? So we took all of the results of all of the form builders, averaged across those 3 calculation tools, and we plot them here as bog plots for every type of form that we've actually built. And you'll notice by the median level that actually there's not much difference or any significant difference across all form types, except for Typeform, which is the one with the multimedia. So whether you're using conditional logic, you're doing it a single page form with 3 questions, or a multi-page form with a whole bunch of questions and a bunch of different form types, form element types, there's virtually no difference. But as soon as you start adding multimedia, so images and video, your form emissions will go up. So that's the only differentiating factor that we found across any form builder. So this means that you can basically split up your form types in media and non-media type forms. And if we then look at the results of every form builder, this is what you get as a bar chart. So essentially you have a couple of standouts, right? We'll talk about those later, like how they compare to each other. But essentially most form tools perform less well on the multimedia form type. In fact, all of them do. The only major difference is Typeform, which managed to have a consistent output regardless of whether you're using multimedia or not. And so essentially what this says is that Typeform is very good at optimizing, compressing images, having lazy loading, that kind of techniques to ensure that if you're loading a Typeform and it contains a lot of multimedia, that your emissions don't go up, that it remains a very efficient web form. Okay, and here comes the ranking of least to most sustainable web forms. So you'll first notice that there's quite a big difference between the most sustainable, which is Paperform at around 0.2 grams of CO2 per form load, and the least sustainable, which is Google Forms at around 1 gram of CO2 per page form. So that's quite a difference, right? That's 5 times more Paperform compares to Google Forms. And then you'll notice that there's essentially 3 categories. You have your top performers, right? Your Paperform, your Weebly, your Tally. You have your middle performance, Fiddleout, 123 Form Builder, Forms app, and then of course there's the worst performer, which really stands out from the rest, and that is Google Forms. So you might see the results and think, well, it's at worst 1 gram of CO2 per form load. Does that really matter that much? Well, when you know that Tally, for example, limits free usage to 50,000 form loads per month, that sort of brings in a whole bunch of carbon, especially if you look at least performance versus worst performance. That's 5 times more carbon depending on the tool that you pick. So if you want to have a digitally sustainable website and you take care in making sure that your colors match and that you keep your website minimal and very fast, it doesn't make any sense to then add a Google form to it or to start doing surveys or collect feedback using Google Forms if you're trying to go for digital sustainability.